Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the basics of breeding Anthurium, literally like the basic steps of it on how to do it, things to take into consideration, kind of step by step through the whole process and what to look for at certain points in the process. And then afterwards, once you actually have the seeds, what to do with them, how to plant them, how to get them to grow, and then how to take care of the little seedlings that grow out of those seeds. I honestly thought that I had done this video already before, but when people asked me to point them to the video where I actually talk about it, I realized I was in bits and pieces throughout different videos. So I wanted to put it together all in one video. And I feel like I shouldn't have to make this disclaimer, but I'm going to make it anyway. I am not a botanist. I'm not a big time breeder. I've done it a handful of times. I've done it enough times that I feel like I can speak to it from my own personal experience on top of what I've seen online. So this is just hobbyist to hobbyist sharing our experiences. And now that so many Anthurium growers are a few years into the hobby and have flowering sized plants, there's a lot of breeding potential. And I think even though Anthurium are really easy to breed, in general, there are just some nuances to consider, and I think it could be helpful for anyone who's just getting into it for the first time. So one of the most common questions I see surrounding breeding Anthurium is how to know when the plants are ready to be bred. It's kind of a complicated question and really can depend on a lot of factors. So first of all, the species of the plant. Some plants will flower very, very young, like Forgetii will flower when they're still very juvenile in comparison to other plants that won't flower until they're quite large and mature. It also depends on the health of the plant in general. How is the root system? How healthy is the plant overall? I think the most important factor to get right is selecting which plant to be the seed bearing or the mother plant. The mother plant, or the one that's actually growing the berries, needs to be strong enough and mature enough to grow the berries without crashing itself, and also produce berries that are containing seeds that are strong enough to grow into healthy plants. I don't think that the maturity level of the pollen parent matters as much. If it does, it definitely doesn't matter as much as the seed parent. And so the general advice is to wait until the second or third inflorescence from that plant before breeding it. Again, I think that really mainly matters for using that plant as a seed parent, but there are definitely exceptions to the second or third inflow rule. So Forgetii, like I said, will flower at a very young age. And in the interest of covering all the bases, the Anthurium flower is called the inflorescence. So this one is my mycorrhizae inflow. So for the parts of the structure, this is the flower stalk is the peduncle. This little sheath is called the spathe. And this is called the spadix, which is technically hundreds of tiny little flowers. If I get right up, I don't know if it's going to focus, but each of these tiny little dots is an individual flower. And these are the sites where you can pollinate the plant, or it will produce pollen to pollinate another plant. This is a plant that's probably on its fourth flower maybe, and I'm not planning on pollinating it anytime soon because I just think it's not big and robust enough to produce really healthy specimens of babies. I mean, the root system is pretty good. I just think that it's not a super robust plant for me in general. So until I can get it growing really robustly, I would only use this as a pollen parent. But on the other hand, this is my Ace of Spades, which only just started flowering. So Ace of Spades, from what I've seen and what I've read from other people, will not flower until it is quite mature. And it's only just putting out its first flower, not from this leaf, but this is the size of the plant at this point. The root system is pretty huge. This is the first flower, which by the way is gorgeous. Let me take its hat off. It's this beautiful plummy red, and the spathe is this gorgeous dark olivey green. It's one of the prettiest inflows in my whole collection. It's actually receptive right now. So this is the first inflow. You can see from here, the next newest leaf after that, right here, it's poking out the second inflow. And soon after that, from this newest leaf, it will be poking out its third inflow. Once the plant gets to the maturity level that it starts to flower, you will often see them flowering leaf after leaf after leaf. Sometimes you'll see it start to flower from the very newest leaf, but sometimes it'll be flowering from 3 leaves back and then onto the second, onto the first. But so long as the plant stays healthy and happy, it should be continuously going leaf, flower, leaf, flower. But I wanted to show you this because I would be much more comfortable using this as a mother plant, even though it would be 2 flowers in versus my mycorrhizae, civet, which is like 4 flowers, and I don't really know if I'll ever use that as a mother plant. And speaking of forgetii, this is a forgetii Carla. Look how tiny this plant is, and it's already producing its first flower. So this one would not be ready to be a mom for like probably 5 or 6 flowers. I needed to get to quite a large size. Speaking from experience, I think it is super important to pick your mother plants wisely, because it can be super tempting to just throw pollen on a plant just to get the berries going. But when you wait all these months to get berries to form, and you have these seeds and you plant them and they turn into these weak little seedlings that struggle to even stay alive, it can be really disheartening, and it's not really like worth growing at that point. So I would encourage you to be patient and wait for like the mother plant to be super strong before starting to breed with it. Side note, I just wanted to share a little system that me and Jing and Charmaine have. So we basically have a spreadsheet where each of us have listed all of our Anthurium, so the name, and then like whether it's flowering, and whether it's been pollinated or it has been used the pollen for something else, and like the date of the pollination. So this just widens our breeding program. So if I wanted to breed, like let's say like my Carla is flowering, there's nothing in my collection that I want to breed with it, I'll look into the spreadsheet and just like look at the list of all of Jing and Charmaine's plants to see if there's anything I can match it to mine. Then we'll just like swap pollen, and it's easier done when it's local. I've never shipped pollen, so I can't speak to that. But if you have friends who are also growing Anthurium, it's helpful to have like your spreadsheets shared on like a Google Doc. So if you're lacking in options within your own collection, you can widen it up to your friends. And side note, for like me and my friends, when we share seed batches, the pollen donor person, the seed bearing person, we all just split it 50-50. Like we just make it as simple as possible. So for the person growing all the seeds, they just harvest it, separate it, wash it, whatever, and then they'll split it in half and just like give the half to the other person. However they want to grow it, sell it, at what point they want to sell it is totally up to them. So all of that considered, you still have to consider like which two plants would complement each other and make nice looking babies that are more up your alley. I think that when the offspring are healthy and like the parents that are going into it are well documented, I don't think it really matters. I think it's super subjective what you find more beautiful. So if it's in your collection, you most likely like how that plant looks. And if you want to breed with it, you have to consider the traits that you want to pass on to the offspring, how those traits might look once mixed with this plant's genes. And this is of course when you're creating hybrids and not breeding two plants of the same species together. Even when breeding two plants of the same species, there will be some variability, but it's not as wide a variability as when you have two completely separate species breeding together. And the genetics is going to be way too complicated for me to talk about, so I'm going to just talk about it in basic terms. With Anthurium, there are going to be certain species that have more dominant traits than others. I don't think there is actually any sort of database for like showing which traits are dominant, which traits are recessive, but you can kind of observe this through looking at hybrids and what the offspring look like in relation to the parent plants. So I'm just going to give a few examples. So obviously Luxurians, very, very dominant parent. Every Lux hybrid looks very close to a Luxurians. This is a Carla Blackier crossed with Luxurians, and when you look at the leaf, it doesn't look like a pure Luxurians, but it doesn't look that different from other Luxurians hybrids. To me, I love it, but I also recognize that it looks like very, very similar to a lot of Luxurians hybrids. Another plant that has really dominant traits is Papillamnum. So this is not verified to be a pap hybrid, but this is my contaminated Carla, one of my favorite plants in my whole collection. But this is sold as a pure Carla from NSC Tropicals, but it was obviously contaminated with something else. This is not a pure Carla Blackier. It is thought to have been contaminated with Papillamnum or a Papillamnum hybrid, but either way, a lot of the traits in the leaf got erased by the pollen parent. It's still really dark, but the venation is like almost all gone. So basically, I like to think about it as like just kind of mixing colors in a pan. Some colors might outpace the other, but when I'm taking two different plants and breeding them together, I'm kind of blending the genes together. So it's really up to you what you want to pass on to the offspring. I personally really like silvery veins. I like the sparkling, bright, bold veins. So with a silvery plant, I would rather cross it with another silvery plant. So right now I'm working on like a mag hybrid cross with a, what was it? King of Spades. So I feel like these two like veiny plants together could be like nice and round. Another much loved pairing is King of Spades crossed with Mycorrhizae, or the inverse of that. But really it is up to you. Two beautiful parents may not make your desired look of an offspring. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk through the steps of the breeding process. So the Anthurium inflorescence is a perfect flower in that it can accept pollen and produce pollen, but in order to protect itself from self-pollination, which is not in the best interest of the plant for biodiversity and like strength of offspring, it will not be simultaneously female or male. Female phase is when it can be accepting of pollen and then become pollinated and produce seeds. Male phase is when it produces pollen that can then be carried to another plant to pollinate that plant. There are certain species that will readily self itself. I don't know all of them, but you can look into it. But for the most part, most Anthurium will not self-pollinate without outside interference. So when the inflorescence emerges, the spadix, which is like the flowery structure, will emerge out of the spathe. After some time, you'll start seeing sticky, like liquid sap that is called stigmatic fluid. It will start from the base of the spadix and start moving up. So when the full structure is like wet and sticky, that's kind of ending the female phase. If that is a flower you plan on pollinating, I would recommend pollinating that plant when it's maybe like 2/3 sticky, but not all the way to the tip, because when you get the whole spadix sticky, there's a very small window before it stops being receptive and then turns into male phase. So I would like to keep it safe and just maybe pollinate like the 2/3 or 3/4 of the inflorescence rather than risking that extra seed yield and like waiting to the very end to pollinate the whole thing. You definitely can pollinate over multiple days if the plant continues to produce stigmatic fluid, but oftentimes in my experience, I've observed that when you pollinate a receptive inflorescence, it will then suddenly stop producing stigmatic fluid and start producing pollen right after that. So anyway, after the female phase, it will turn into male phase where it's producing pollen. I would not advise collecting the pollen off of the plant at this stage because it will be mixed with the pollen that you put on the plant. So if you take the pollen off at this stage, which is already mixed with the pollen that you had used before, and then you apply it to a different plant, you can't say for sure what that plant is pollinated by. Of course, if it doesn't matter to you and you're just like looking to make babies, you do you. I'm not the police, but that's personally what I would avoid doing. But if you didn't pollinate that inflow, that's the point where you can take the pollen, apply it to a different plant, or take it off and put it into, like oftentimes people use tin foil or one of those centrifuge tubes, and people will also put silica packets in there to keep it dry because you don't want moisture on the pollen, and you can pop that into the freezer. I've heard it can be frozen for up to 12 months before it stops being viable, but I've also used a pollen that was much fresher, like maybe a month old, that wasn't viable. I've also used much older pollen that was in just tin foil, no silica packet. It worked. But essentially when you're storing pollen, you want to make sure that it is labeled for what plant it was, and you want to protect it from moisture. Make sure that whatever it's in is like really well sealed. There's a lot of moisture in your fridge and your freezer. And that's how you can store pollen to use on a future plant. You can use it to self a plant. So like a plant produces a flower, you take pollen off of it, and that when that plant produces its next flower, you can use that previous pollen to self that plant. And of course, there's going to be exceptions to everything. So sometimes certain plants will like sometimes produce pollen, sometimes not, sometimes be receptive, sometimes not. From my collection, one example I can think of is my Polydiflorum, which almost always produces stigmatic fluid and is receptive, but very rarely produces pollen. Another example is my Queen of Hearts, which is thought to be a sterile hybrid. I think people have bred with it, but it's very unlikely that it's going to produce seeds. All the inflows I've ever grown from it have been receptive, but have never produced pollen. One thing that's like optional, but I found gives me a little bit of peace of mind, is using these organza bags. So this can prevent cross-contamination of pollen. So if you're going to breed a plant and you want to make sure that it's definitely whatever cross you're going to make, you can pop one of these on. They basically, if you search like organza bag for jewelry or something, that's basically what this is, but you can pop this onto the inflow. I mean, this will only fit like a smallish inflow, so it would definitely fit my Carla Viva. So I'm just going to pop this on right now. It is receptive, so if I want to protect it from unwanted pollen, I would just pop one of these on, and then when I do go to pollinate it, I will know that whatever pollen I use is definitely what is pollinating this plant. You can get way bigger ones than this. This is just like the size that I went for because it was like a pretty good price, and like my inflows aren't usually that big. There's a couple in my collection that won't fit this. This can also be useful for when the plant has berries that are like ripening and you want to prevent berries from falling off and you not finding them, this can be like used to catch any fallen berries. After you pollinate the plant, you can still leave this on so when it goes into male phase and there's pollen, you can prevent the pollen from like flying around your greenhouse or your room or whatever and accidentally pollinating a different plant. One question I see all the time is whether an inflorescence will still produce pollen after being successfully pollinated, and yes, it often will. So if your plant is producing pollen even after you pollinated it, don't worry, it still might have taken. So essentially a successful pollination can vary in appearance depending on the plant, but you're basically waiting for it to not die off or yellow. So signs of a yellowing inflorescence is sometimes the spadix will turn color, but not the correct color. So like a dying off color, and that will change from plant to plant. The peduncle near to the spathe will start to turn yellow a little bit. Those are the early signs of a dying off inflorescence. And then later off, obviously, like the spadix will start to shrivel and start to like droop. The yellowing of the peduncle will extend all the way down to the base, and obviously at that point it looks like a dying inflow. But if the pollination is successful, it's now a fruiting body called the infructescence. The individual flowers will start to change color. They might start to swell. You'll see like the entire spadix maybe getting a little bit fatter. In certain species, the spathe will change color. When the flower starts to get really swollen, that's when you know it's like definitely successful. However, even though the infructescence is producing berries, it can still abort midway through before it gets to the very end and has like proper viable seeds. It's happened to me a whole bunch of times. I try not to read into it too much. It's definitely something I'll keep logged in my memory, like maybe this plant's not a suitable mother plant or something, but I don't read into it too much. Then from here on, how long you have to wait really depends on the species. So gestation periods can be wildly variable between different species. I just harvested berries off my Carla and it's been just about 2 months and a couple of days. And that is really short. A forgetii will be like 3 to 4 months. I think my papillamum was like 3.5 months or so. Luxurians takes like a year plus. Clarinervium takes like a year plus. That's also just like rewinding something to consider for who to use as a mother plant versus the pollen plant, because most people don't want to wait a year plus to get the berries. So if you want to make a Lux hybrid, sometimes you would be better off using the luxurians as the pollen plant rather than the seed plant. When the berries are starting to get near to ready, it's going to start changing color. Oftentimes it'll be something more in like the reddish family, like red, orange for Clarinervium. A lot of them will be purple. So how to tell when they're ready to harvest is when they start to like poke out. So really the tip of the berry is like a reddish purple color, and then what's inside of the infructescence is more of a white color oftentimes. So when you start seeing the white protruding, and you'll know when it's ready. It's like protruding so much it's almost dangling, and you can just like pluck it off with like the gentlest pressure. That's when it's ready for harvest. So for harvest, there's like so many ways to do it. I'll just tell you how I do it. Not all of the berries are going to be ready at the same time. I usually have to harvest over the course of like a week or 2 weeks. So I'll just pluck off whatever's ready. I'll get a damp paper towel. I'll put the berries on top of it and then just start popping the seeds out of the berries. And I'll put the seeds into a cup of water that I'll swirl around. I'll stir it around, make a little vortex, and then just like gently pour the water out, and I'll do this rinse a few times. Another way you could do it is like take a sieve that's like a little kitchen sieve, and you put the berries in it and you just like scrub it. The Anthurium seeds are pretty hard. They can take a little bit of scrubbing. I personally haven't done it, but that's what Amanda does. This is helpful when you have a lot of berries to clean all at the same time. I haven't had like humongous seed yields that I've needed to do that with. I kind of find it a little bit therapeutic to just sit there and like pop one seed at a time and separate it out. So once the seeds are clean, I honestly feel like if you have a little bit of like flesh left on it, a little bit of skin, I don't think it really matters that much. As long as you get it cleaned as best as possible, it's then ready to plant. However, I like to keep my seeds in water until everything has been harvested, and I'll plant them all at the same time. The reason for that is, and I don't know if this is like necessarily better, but once the seed is out of water and planted into substrate, it's going to germinate a lot faster. And I'd rather all of my seeds start germinating at the same time so I can really accurately see who's stronger and who's weaker. That's what I've been doing for my last few seed batches. So the first harvested seeds will be in water for like over a week, sometimes up to 2 weeks. And if you're changing the water regularly, it shouldn't be an issue. At least it hasn't been an issue for me. So this was just harvested yesterday. These are Carla Blackier crossed with Carla Bvep seeds. These were clean and they're just in water. I'm going to be harvesting more later and just cleaning them, popping them in here until everything is harvested. And when I pop seeds in, I swirl them like this. You can see like the seeds spinning, and that will loosen up little bits of like skin and stuff. And that skin will usually kind of float and you can just like kind of skim it off the top. With a lot of seed batches, you can expect some seeds are not viable, will never germinate. They might start to grow something, but never turn into an actual plant. Those are usually the seeds that I see mold on, but I don't find that mold from like any residual berry flesh on the seeds has been like detrimental to the seed germination. My preferred substrate for germinating seeds is tree fern fiber. I have some like perlite mixed in there sometimes. You can definitely use moss. I personally don't like moss, but if it's good for germinating seeds, I will give it that. The only problem is that like with long strand sphagnum moss, the tiny little seedling roots will really get tangled in there. So when you remove the sphagnum moss, if you do want to remove the sphagnum moss, it can damage those roots a lot more than tree fern fiber would. But really you can germinate anything. People will germinate in like wet paper towel. You can germinate in like perlite. You can germinate in pond. I've done seedlings in pond. I've never germinated in pond. One thing that Amanda used to do is that she'll take moss. So she'll germinate on a moss layer, but underneath that moss layer is like whatever substrate she wants to actually grow that plant in. So maybe it's soil, or maybe it's tree fern, maybe it's pond, but then it'll root into the desired substrate and there's only like that small layer of moss to remove later. So I'll show you my preferred germination setup right now. So when you have a ton of seeds, it's not really like space efficient to germinate seeds in an individual pot, but it will save time in the future. So you kind of have to weigh it up. If you only have like 30 seeds, maybe it's useful to use like something like this, a germination tray. This is just like a mini one. It only has 12 cells, but this is my preferred way to germinate seeds because they all have their individual cells. They're not competing for water and nutrients. On the flip side, if you use a communal container and everything is potted in one container, if you leave it in there too long, it can be a really huge pain to separate them all. They're also competing with each other for nutrients and resources. And if there are any stragglers that are much smaller than others, it's really hard, for me at least, to actually say that that's definitely a runt, or given its own pot, would it have been a lot healthier and stronger? So I like to give them all like an equal fighting chance and do this. It takes up a bit more room, but I just prefer it. And if the seed doesn't germinate, then I just like pluck that seed out, take the substrate out and reuse it. So this one, for example, it was a horrible germination rate. So this was red crystal port crossed with king of spades. I only have one healthy seedling out of that. So I think me and Charmaine did this cross together and we got like 30, no, I think there was like 50 or 60 seeds and they all started rotting. And then near to the end, they were mostly rotted. So by the time I had planted it, maybe there was only like 2 whole seeds. Everything else was like half eaten. So this is the only one I have left. And this one is going to get babied. Oh my gosh, this leaf just hardened off and it's so thick. I was so excited for this cross. I'll definitely be uppotting this soon because I want to see what this ends up looking like. This one is a little runty, but since it is sizing up, a lot slower than this one, but it is sizing up, I'm going to give it a chance as well. This one, it was planted at the same time, and look at that leaf. Can you even see it? It's right here. So this is probably never going to turn into anything. So all my hopes and dreams are riding on this plant here. Here is another batch. I did not plant these ones. This was from Jing. This is one of our collabs. This one is Dark Phoenix crossed with King of Spades, which I was also very, very excited for. So this is one of those like crosses where it's like a very dominant plant with the very dominant plant, because Dark Phoenix and King of Spades both seem to be very dominant, but they're very different. So I'm really excited to see what turns out with these ones. As you can see, a lot of them have rotted. No, you probably can't see. They're more like this one here. Something's poking out of it, but you can see the seed is brown and see-through. There's some healthy ones in here, so I'm going to be growing these out a little bit more and weeding out the dying ones. But you can see this one is a much fluffier, twiggier tree fern mix. It's in a communal pot, so I will be separating these out into their individual pots as soon as possible. You might sometimes hear people saying like this seedling was separated out much later than other ones, so it's a little bit smaller. And it kind of speaks to growing in communal pots can be a lot slower for sizing up for seedlings. So I personally just want to give them like the strongest head start as possible. So that brings me to my next topic, which has a lot to do with selecting strong mothers. So I wanted to show you two different batches, like one really weak and one strong. So this was a batch of Forgetii Dark Phoenix, Dark Forgetii Dark Phoenix. My goal was to get something like no silver, minimal veining with Dark Phoenix kind of shape, but sometimes with a closed sinus. So the Forgetii mother plant was not very mature and it wasn't really strong. So the resulting seeds, well, the germination rate, first of all, horrible. These were all dead, so I didn't bother watering them. The ones that did germinate are stuck at this tiny little size. I've also heard that Forgetii has pretty bad germination rates. A lot of seeds never germinate. I've had like hit or miss. I had like certain batches that were a lot better than others, but this was planted, I don't remember when. I think it was sometime in the summer, but it was months before this batch, which is Dark Phoenix crossed with Pap RA5. So this is Jing's mother plant, Dark Phoenix, which she's had for so many years. It's been a successful mother before. Pretty much every seed germinated. And these are the first, they're a little bit bleached, but these are the first leaves and it's freaking huge. They're all on their second leaves now. Another batch that was really good was my Pap RA5 crossed with Fortune and Ralph Linum. This was kind of like a collab ish with Charmaine. We co-own the pollen parent and like the Pap RA5 was mine. So if you've been on our live sales, we've been selling some of these, but these have been growing so well. I think the only straggler I have is this one, but it has been sizing up a little bit, just been like a little slower than the others, but everything else has been growing so well. This is one of my favorite ones. Like this is one I held back. Look how dark it is. I'm trying not to get it too close to the camera, but it's so beautiful. It really took after the Fort Sherman Ralph Linum, I feel like. Everything looks really sharp. And my Pap RA5 is like really rounded and super bumpy. So my hope is when these plants grow out, they're gonna get the bumpiness from the RA5, but keep that sharp and dark appearance of the Fort Sherman Ralph Linum. But this one is one of my darker ones. And this one is actually really dark as well. This one's the biggest one. It has been growing amazingly. These have been sizing up so well. Like, so the first leaf, I don't know if you can see it, it's down here. And then with every leaf, it has been sizing up to there, then to there, then to there, and this is the latest leaf. It's so pretty. If any of you guys watching this have bought one of these, I really want to see the updates because I don't breed a lot, so it's really nice to see like how my plants turn out. So I'm going to talk a bit about my thoughts or opinions, my personal opinions on selling seeds and stuff. I personally wouldn't buy ungerminated seeds from anyone, just knowing that seeds take like only a matter of days before rooting out into the substrate. If it's been like a week or more and it still hasn't germinated, the chances of it germinating and becoming a nice, strong, healthy plant to me are pretty low. So yeah, I would only buy germinated seeds. I would also only prefer to buy seeds like one leaf in, because in the first leaf, you can kind of see how robust it can potentially be given the correct care. So these ones, like massive first leaves, I'm quite confident that these will be nice and healthy seedlings. So now we're going to talk about like general seedling care. And of course, it's going to be very general. So at the beginning, it's going to be the substrate that it was germinated in. So again, could be tree fern, could be moss, could be perlite, could be pond, could be soil. I like to keep the substrate a little bit more wet. The substrate itself should be a little bit denser than a full-grown adult should be. So I would avoid putting like giant chunks into the substrate. If you think about it, the roots are really tiny. The leaves are really small. You need to give it adequate moisture so they don't dry out. And I think drying out is like really bad for seedling. You can kill it right away where you wouldn't kill an adult plant by letting it dry out. I give my seedlings a little bit higher light so they're a little bit closer to the grow light. So if the grow light's like right here, all the trays are like this. If you get a bit of bleaching like this, then just dial it back a bit. If you can't pull it back from the grow light any further, you can always put like a piece of parchment paper over the grow light to kind of diffuse it a little bit. So again, I keep my seedlings a little bit wetter, never letting them dry out. I give them more humidity at this stage too. These seedling domes I have them in have this little valve, so you can open up the airway a little bit. I keep it about halfway open, so it's not fully enclosed, but at the same time, you can also keep seedlings in 100% humidity, like fully closed bin with no airflow whatsoever, no air exchange, and I've seen that it be fine as well. But for me, I like to keep a little bit of an air exchange going because my intention is to grow them out and then sell them, and I don't want it to be like such a drastic acclimation period. And for feed, you want to start feeding them like one, I personally start feeding them 1 leaf in. It is recommended to use a half diluted amount. So when you start out feeding your seedlings, do it like half the strength that you would do an adult Anthurium. The idea is to not burn the roots. Personally, Personally, I use TPS1. I've yet to burn anything with TPS1, so I watered this with full strength TPS1. I don't think that what you're seeing, the yellowing, is necessarily nutrient burn. I mean, it could be, but I was a little bit too lazy to dilute it further. So I just I was watering my plants, saw that these needed water, and I just watered it with the same concentration that I water my other plants with. But that is specifically with TPS1 that I find really hard to burn plants with. So anything else I can't say for sure. I would recommend doing half strength dilution for seedlings. And I like these trays because they're clear so I can see like the root formation. Once they're about 3 leaves in, I like to see some roots on the side of the individual cells. And at that point, I would move them into a larger pot. So this is kind of like going into like general Anthurium care. It's very similar to like upsizing your Anthurium before it's super root bound to encourage the constant sizing up of that plant. So this is an example. This is not my cross. This is from the Homebody. This is the Portier cross of the Carla Blackier. So I got this maybe a few weeks ago and I immediately put it into the three inch pot. Is this a 3-inch pot? But it's pretty tall for a seedling pot. And the idea is that I wanted to size up as quick as possible. So all my seedlings around this size get this pot. That's what I did for these paps. So this pap, my largest pap seedling, this is ready to go into a 4-inch pot. And from here, it's like how much time do you have to constantly be upsizing the pots for these? But that's kind of my suggestion for getting them to grow as big as possible. But I wanted to show you examples of like my strong seedlings versus my weak seedlings, and what the strong seedlings end up looking like, because when you're buying germinated seeds, you are taking a gamble on the overall health of the plant. And without knowing the strength of the mother plant and only seeing like a picture of the leaf, you don't really know how suitable it is to be a seed-bearing plant. So if you happen to have bought seeds and they don't really grow very well, it might not be you. Of course, care can always be modified to optimize plant growth, but it might not be you. It might just be a weak plant. So always keep that in mind. I think the more seedlings you work with, the more you know what you're looking for. And I guess like some growers will only sell plants once they have proven themselves as a growing plant, which I think a lot of people would appreciate as buyers. The only thing is like, you would pay a premium for those plants. You're going to be paying full market price for those plants. So it really depends on like where you see the value in. Like, do you see value in the gamble and like not knowing what you're going to get with like certain crosses before they've grown out to show certain traits? Like, you enjoy the kind of mystery part of it. It really is all up to you and what you want to see out of your plants. And growing things from babies is so rewarding because personally, this size of plant, I haven't shown you this in a long time. This little like preteen going into teenager size plant, this is my favorite size of Anthurium. I like how little space they take up. I like that they're already showing signs of what it'll be at maturity, but it's not quite there yet, but it's not like a boring little green seedling either. This is my favorite. So I really like growing plants from little teeny tiny babies, which is why I'm so excited for this one to grow out. Port cross with Carla. Like, I think it's going to be beautiful. This, by the way, is Carla Black Widow Michelle. But going back to seedling and humidity, I think personally a lot of seedlings can be grown in ambient. I have done it before with varying levels of success. I feel like one more leaf and this one can be potentially growing in lower humidity. This currently is living in a dome in 100% humidity. I personally don't like to do that. I like to baby them and give them like optimal conditions until they're a little bit bigger. But Amanda, or Bunny on Instagram, she grows her seedlings in ambient because she grows most of her things in ambient and she wants to make it as seamless as possible for her buyers. So she just has them like super hardy, acclimated by the time she sends them out. So it really depends on everybody, but she's proven that it can be done. So basically, in a nutshell, Anthurium seedling care, once they've started sprouting leaves and are growing, it's very, very similar to regular Anthurium care. It's just that maybe the mix should be a little bit denser, personally, I think, and also just a little bit more moisture and constant, which for me is the mixture of moisture through the substrate and ambient moisture, keeping it in high humidity. Anyways, my brain is about mush now. I'm going to end it here. I hope something was useful to anyone who's like starting to breed for the first time or growing a bunch of seedlings. I always forget that like every week there's a bunch of new people entering the hobby. And also this is kind of like a thing that people keep bringing up. If you haven't heard by now, Doc Block released a whole bunch of massive flowering size gorgeous Michelle's to Home Depot. From what I see, it's only been on the West Coast in the US. People are going crazy and like people are getting really mad and stuff like that. But there's been like some valid points brought up, which is like, this is a good thing because this is going to bring new people to the Anthurium hobby who have like never grown Anthurium before, but see like this gorgeous Michelle in Home Depot. Some of them are marked down to $20. It's insane. And they're gonna see like how fun Anthurium are. So I personally am so excited for people to be entering the hobby, breeding their Anthurium, sharing seedlings, and just like sharing in the enthusiasm. It's just very exciting to me. Last thing I want to mention, because I feel like there's going to be questions if I don't mention it. My teacher is from IS. I got it at IS. This illustration was by Andrew Block. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Blowrock. These plants are meant to represent the speakers at IS. So we got Papillamnum, I believe this is Dad Bod by Paul Marcellini. This is a microphone, so ignore that. This is Anthurium awfulturianum to represent Enid from NSE Tropicals. This is Antilacii or Bveb to represent Rory Antilac. This is a Delta Force to represent Marie Knock. And this is Anthurium Ace of Spades Variegated to represent Bill from Silverchrome. I don't know if they're going to re-release this t-shirt. I feel like they would, but currently as of right now, I don't think it's for sale anymore. But I'm going to link the International Airway Society shop in the description. There are some designs there that were available at IAS, still available now for $25. I think a lot of people will really like the SP Nova DF design that was by Frank Luca, but I will link in the description for anyone who doesn't know. You can get t-shirts directly from their shop, and of course all the proceeds will benefit the society. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have anything to add for your seedling care routine, feel free to leave in the comments. I would love to hear it. And with that, I will leave you. I hope you had a great weekend. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah.